Hello and welcome to Colonial Outcast, the anti-imperialist podcast that your evangelical uncle will hate, especially if he spouts out logical fallacies like, all you kids want to talk about is Palestine, but what about the Christians being G-sided in Nigeria? Well, first of all, Uncle Bill, there are Christians being actively G-sided in Gaza and ethnically cleansed in the West Bank, about whom you're completely silent. But apart from that, generally reject the genocide label in Nigeria for while horrific violence is happening, it doesn't even come close to meeting the criteria. And we will discuss the groups and lobbyists pushing this Christian genocide narrative and why. Does it have to do with money and rare earths and wanting a Western aligned base of operations to maybe destabilize anti-imperialist, pan-Africanist governments like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger? I don't know. Sounds kind of crazy, like something the U.S. has definitely not done before. It definitely didn't do that as one of the strategic prompts in Afghanistan to establish a strategic base of operations to monitor and isolate China's Xinjiang province or Pakistan's nuclear program. Look, it's just not something we do, which is why Trump suggested last month that U.S. troops could return to Afghanistan in response to China's ramping up its nuclear program. Because we are not here in the United States about strategic domination. We're about saving Christians who we don't really care about because they aren't Ukrainians and upholding democracy, which definitely doesn't mean installing a comprador ruling elite in a mineral-rich country who will sell off their people and resources to Western capitalists. So we are here for part two of the Twilight of the American Empire. We'll be focusing on Africa, and if we have enough time, we'll make time for Gaza. Yesterday, we talked about Venezuela and our engagement with South America in terms of, establishing regional hegemony and a strategic position that will thwart China's Belt and Road Initiative through the Panama Canal and influence in the wider region. This plays into, trying to maintain the preeminence of the U.S. petrodollar, which allows us to sanction countries and assert economic and financial domination and stuff like that. And it ties into our crisis of capital accumulation and the AI bubble that looks like it's going to burst. So today we are going to be applying everything we talked about yesterday in the old imperial playbook: create chaos, internalize conflict, hopes to extract resources at surplus value. And we are going to be taking this from South America to Africa. And we're going to start with Nigeria, then move on to Sudan, maybe Yemen, who knows? So how we feeling?
It's a depressing conversation, but it's definitely one that needs to be had, because I feel like the African continent and the events that are taking place there aren't generally discussed nowhere near as much as they ought to be. And it's a huge continent with an abundant amount of resources that has been at the receiving end of the imperial wrath, probably more so than most places. So yeah, it's definitely a lot to get into and a much needed topic.
Yeah. So for a lot of people or Americans, I feel like before Trump mentioned Nigeria, not a lot of people knew what that country was. And now apparently everyone's like, Christians are being genocided and we need to, save them or whatever. And of course, the hypocrisy is plain to see. But this video posted by the White House like a couple weeks ago started to soft launch the idea of some sort of military presence or intervention or engagement with the country of Nigeria. So here's what Trump posted.
Christianity is facing an existential threat in Nigeria.
Christianity is facing an existential threat in Nigeria. Sorry, guys, about the thing. I just screen recorded this. This was what the White House social media account posted.
Thousands and thousands of Christians are being killed. Radical Islamists are responsible for this mass slaughter. I am hereby making Nigeria a country of particular concern. That's a legal definition. When the Christians or any such group is slaughtered, like is happening in Nigeria, 3,100 versus 4,476 worldwide. What horrible numbers. Something has to be done. I am asking Congressman Riley Moore, together with Chairman Tom Cole and the House Appropriations Committee, to immediately look into this matter and to report back to me. And I mean, like, immediately. The United States cannot stand by while such atrocities are happening in Nigeria and numerous other countries. It's not only Nigeria, it's all over. We stand ready, willing, and able to save our great Christian population around the world. This is not going to happen. The killing of Christians is not going to happen.
Did he say not just Nigeria, but all over? Did he just give us
over.
carte blanche? Did he just give us carte blanche to just bomb the shit out of everybody we want to?
I mean, honestly, I think with Trump, we also have to remember he just opens his mouth and says things. I think he just lacks the ability to articulate what exactly he means. So he probably didn't know what other country to state. So he just said all over because, what else are you going to say?
Here's the thing, though. Like, he stayed on point for like 2 minutes. So I think he was telepromptering it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think at the end, I think there was the teleprompter must have, just finished its point. And then he was still very much, kind of passionate in the moment. So he winged it. And that's why we heard and all over by the end of that. But listen, look, I mean, it's rather interesting, isn't it? The new, I guess, narrative that's been shaped around Nigeria. I mean, first of all,
it's a Western-aligned government, first of all.
It is, but it's a Western-aligned government that since 2018, much like actually in the case of Venezuela, entered the BRI, and it's a Western-aligned government that is increasingly becoming very strongly intertwined with China. With, it's also actually it's its biggest basically trading partner as it currently stands, and China receives for the most part oil and natural gas from Nigeria. It's another source of oil and natural gas for China, in addition to obviously Iran, Venezuela, and Russia. And that is just simply unacceptable to the United States. And again, it kind of connects to all the projects that China wants to kind of, I guess, produce within the totality of Africa, because Nigeria is one of the most, more powerful, countries within the African continent that is now further gravitating towards China and establishing the sort of infrastructure that will connect and create these sort of interconnective economic trade routes within the continent itself, and also obviously with other parts of the world that will help materialize China's vision. And that is not going to be to the liking of the United States.
No, not at all. And we can talk about like just with foreign investment, the Nigerian government or corporation associated has why am I blanking? It starts with an H. Is building a $400 million rare earths processing facility in Nigeria. So that's also a matter of concern, especially with the government. So buddy, so to speak, with China. But real quick, I just want to talk about narratives and how these are kind of manufactured. So first of all, this idea of Christian genocide really gets its base going. That's like one thing that they can always rally behind, or for like consent to intervene. The Christians are being killed. He said, our Christian brothers and sisters, or what did he say at the beginning? Sorry.
And for me,
is
kind of jammed up a little bit.
Existential threat in Nigeria. Thousands and
Christianity, take up the cross. It's time to go on a crusade. But all of this is pretty much totally utter nonsense. Now, I don't say it's complete utter nonsense, but like saying that I'm not saying that Christians in Nigeria are safe. Most mainstream human rights publications have shown that there have been thousands of Christians who have been massacred across central and northern parts of Nigeria, the country, and in fact, are often treated like second-class citizens. But the reason why this is kind of like ridiculous is because, first of all, a lot of this violence is nothing new. This is nothing new. Especially in the northern and central parts. Like, there's been interreligious violence in Nigeria for a long time, right? In the country, I would say, like, unfortunately, what we need to understand is that this interreligious violence also has like land, right, and an economic element to it, because a lot of this farmland in Nigeria is owned by Christians. There's kind of like an even split, Christians and Muslims. And while a lot of the herdsmen in Nigeria are Muslims, a lot of the land is owned by Christian, and this has resulted because of like desertification and other climate displacement events, like the geography is kind of changing right now, has resulted in conflict because the herdsmen want to use the land for their animals to graze, and they don't really have any other options. The farmers want their land to be protected from these animals who are trying to graze on it. And unfortunately, the result has been that herdsmen have used violence, including the massacre of farmers, who then take the land for themselves. Now, in addressing this element, I'm not trying to obviously justify the violence. In fact, I'm actually trying to get to the root cause, which is not this like religious war that they're trying to gin up. And a lot of political lobbyists, evangelical lobbyists in Washington are pushing for, and the root cause is partly not just a question of theology or religion, but like if you want to help protect Christians, especially in Nigeria, you want to help protect Nigerians more generally, you have to address the question of land and not engage in military intervention. And on that point, military intervention is not going to help because it's not just Christians being slaughtered. There's Boko Haram, there's ISWAP, Islamic State in West Africa province, who's not just killing Christians. Like, did we not learn that the Islamic State kills everyone who they believe is an apostate, right? And so this kind of serves the kind of dark purposes of U.S. interventionism in general, because we know that if we were to invade, and we say explicitly, we're just there to protect the Christians, that's going to have create massive concerns for like a large part of the population, like half the population, who is Muslim. So what are they going to do? They're going to go running into Boko Haram and IS recruiting drives. And that's going to exacerbate the problem of Salafi jihadism in the country and surrounding regions, which will further necessitate U.S. direct intervention. So this is kind of like how we ramp up, and it takes a while to get going, but this is how we ramp up a cycle of violence and justification for being in a region. Because we say, oh, it's a hotbed for terrorism, and that promise of intervention actually leads people into more radical groups, which then furthers the justification. So this is an old playbook we've seen before. And of course, it's not about Christians. We don't care about the Christians in Azerbaijan. We don't care about the Christians in Palestine. We're actively like helping Israel displace them so much. So like what this is about is what Alina was talking about. It's about domination, strategic, and resource driven. And it's about land. But one of the main reasons, if you haven't paid attention, the global war on terror, and sorry, I'm just kind of like putting some thoughts together right now, has kind of changed from what it was in the 2000s or the 2000s to 2020 or 2021. It's now not just against like Islamists, it's pretty much anybody that threatens U.S. interests, or any time or place we need to find a reason to be there, we will find a way to use terrorism as a justification. So be it Venezuela, be it here. The one thing that makes Nigeria a little easier, because there is kind of like a legal framework, because it's Boko Haram, which is a direct affiliate of the Islamic State. So this is actually something that wouldn't probably happen yet, but we are definitely financing separatist groups, or at least like Western cutouts are, that are counter to the government, because it's not really going in a direction that we want it to go in. And if that fails, direct intervention.
Yeah. So actually, I'm just going to continue off what you just said. When we're talking about Boko Haram, when we're talking about the Islamic State of Western Africa, these are the kind of the major Islamic jihadist groups which are operating inside of Nigeria. I mean, so Boko Haram is actually supposed to be like a branch of Al Qaeda inside Nigeria. And in fact, the Islamic State of Western Africa was part of Boko Haram, but there was that split, the same split that we saw occur in Syria, where they became more loyal to ISIS, and then Boko Haram remained loyal to Al Qaeda. And these sort of ideas, they're not, I mean, they're both extremist organizations, but there is a clash as to a certain ideological differences in terms of approach, etc. But so this is kind of the separation. And so they are at war with each other, but they're also, become groups that have been inflicting civil, chaos inside of Nigeria for a good, very long time, especially over the last decade or so. And it's always important to remember that when we're speaking about these groups, when we're speaking about Boko Haram and the Islamic State of Western Africa, that we know for a fact now, based on the Clinton emails, based on WikiLeaks, based on intelligence reports back from 2012 onwards, that given the fact that they're connected and they are openly connected to Al-Qaeda, they are part of the transnational jihadist groups that have been funded and sponsored by countries such as the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar. This is the information that we know now thanks to these, the leaked documents, as well as, like I said, intelligence memos from back in 2012, and the idea, how the Saudi Arabia fits into that, but also how the United States itself has funded these organizations, particularly in West Asia, and how that funding, whether it's through Syria, because so many of their kind of little subsets, like Al-Nusra, for example, in Syria, they were receiving, they were able to access, whether directly or indirectly, funds and weapons from these, from the West as part of the support for the moderate opposition. That so this has been, there's this kind of Western and Saudi, Qatar, UAE funding of these organizations, and we know how a lot of these weapons, a lot of these that they use have been mobilizing through West Asia into the African continent, and how it makes their way into Nigeria, and there's a massive black market, and this is how they operate. And I guess something as well I would also like to bring attention to is obviously the events that happened in Libya, obviously during or after Gaddafi. And I can recall the bombing in Manchester, the court case that had happened in the UK. One of the was it the bombing in Manchester? I can't remember. I think it was one of the individuals that were caught by the police and trialed said that he insisted that they were trained by NATO, etc. So we can see how these comprador states in West Asia, who all are part of the same capitalist structures, at the end of the day, they all are self-serving, and the system itself helps benefit them in multiple ways to preserve their own interests, have been funding these organizations to not only disrupt West Asia, but to disrupt Nigeria as well. And in fact, even all the way down to the Sahel Alliance, like Burkina Faso is also combating the same sort of jihadist groups. And the idea is to sow enough chaos into these countries to prevent them again from being able to economically prosper, but also a lot of them do engage and they fund themselves by the illegal extraction of gold in this case, which is quite common, because that's another thing as well. Gold is also a very important metal, not just rare earths, but gold is also a very important metal when it comes to AI, to high tech. It's part of the production process, and it's very essential, as well as to backing the financial system and obviously for investors. So this is how it all comes into play. And so a lot of these organizations that Trump is referring to here and speaking about the genocide and the killing of Christians, which, like you said, it's not a genocide, and it doesn't satisfy the legal criteria. And in fact, there's equal amount of deaths between both Christians and Muslims. The idea is, the irony is that a lot of these organizations received, whether directly or indirectly, funding from, allies of the United States, including in many instances the U.S. itself. And so that's the irony behind it. But it's what you said. They sort of provide the backing for these groups through indirect channels. They sponsor them, and we saw the same thing. I mean, this originated in Afghanistan. It was the Mujahideen, which had originated in Afghanistan. It's the process of creating these groups to, I guess, generate internalized chaos. And in doing so, they're able to destroy the basic civic infrastructure of a country that prevents it from being able to economically grow, prosper, and engage in international trade and into international relations and diplomatic relations.
Or simply able to be a peer with its adjacent countries and create like a Pan-African alliance, which is not something
exactly. Absolutely. And so right now, in the case of Nigeria, it's very interesting because Nigeria is a country that is considered to be very rich in rare earth minerals. I mean, especially untapped rare earth minerals. And I think there's been, and this is what I was trying to find, because there was an article I was looking for that I read and I wanted to send it to you, but I forgot. Discussing as it was an article with regards to China, but as it currently stands, China is effectively, has already set up massive, companies in Nigeria to start basically extracting these rare earth minerals. I just want to find the name of the companies because now I can't remember, but I can't exactly find the article now. And what does this mean? Again, we're seeing China in setting up the infrastructure, building the infrastructure, extracting resources that the United States needs, and this is an industry that China has a monopoly over, and that infrastructure itself as well is really going to create a perfect kind of, I guess, system within Africa, which is going to kind of fit into this whole BRI, I guess, trade goals that China has for the region. And in doing so, industrializing a region that for so long has been deprived for the very purpose of consistently being able to exploit it. So this rhetoric that's coming out of Trump at the moment is just another opportunity to infiltrate into Nigeria. And if you look at the declarations made by the Nigerian president, he had essentially said, yes, we do have a problem with these organizations like Boko Haram, etc. But speaking of war is irrational. And what did he say? If you like, you can, we can fight against these organizations together. And this, to me, was very reminiscent of Syria and Iraq, when obviously the United States, and still until today, refuses to actually completely leave Iraq on the basis of, the fear of ISIS, which is rather ironic that, especially now with the recent, visits of Jelani in Washington, and sort of pledging to fight ISIS and other jihadist groups, given his own background. But it's sort of the same sort of objective. So my personal opinions, I don't believe, and they don't even have the capacity, as we said, they're not going to invade Nigeria now, but what they're trying to do is intimidate Nigeria into, I guess, severing ties to a certain degree with China, which is impossible, or at the very least, allowing greater American involvement inside of Nigeria, military involvement inside of Nigeria, and access, in my opinion, probably to resources, because we've seen this with Trump before. He does use different forms of I guess, pressure, whether it's through, I guess, war rhetoric or economic warfare, to try to coerce concessions out of countries. And I believe that that's what's most likely we're going to see in Nigeria. But it is also, like you said, setting the precedent for future projects inside of the African continent as a whole, which they are losing control of, especially after the Sahel Alliance and what that has inspired among Africans and the entire Pan-African movement.
I think we had to get rid of Agadez Air Base in Niger. I think one of the first steps will be trying to establish a military presence there, even if it's small, because once the U.S. is in with a base, it's hard to get them out.
Yeah, this is what they're going to try to do. So, but this is how they're going to try to coerce those kind of concessions, by threatening war. Okay, well, we won't invade, we won't target you, but we need to fight these organizations which our allies are funding, so that we can essentially, because this is which our allies are funding, but we need to fight them. So we need to cooperate with you. We want a base, and we want to basically set ourselves up in the African continent, because China has already been dominating in many ways the African continent now for over the decade, and the United States at this point is rushing to catch up. And generally, the West has lost a lot of influence, especially in West Africa, with the way in the last 2 years the Sahel Alliance has also kicked out France. So there is a drastic change in the status quo in Africa, which is looking more towards not just China, but towards BRICS. And even in the last United Nations headquarters, meeting in New York, in the headquarters in New York, it was actually the African states were some of the most, not all of them, but a significant number of them, some of the most vocal in terms of completely revamping the entirety of the United Nations, giving rise to, countries of the global South, and restructuring power dynamics that would favor, the countries of the global South. So we can see that there is a movement happening within the African continent, which is, as we said, incredibly rich as well. And the United States is now going to have to find a way to infiltrate that. But that's honestly, at this point, I think it's, given all these other projects that they can't succeed on, I don't see that happening on the African continent. In particularly, at least in Nigeria's case, I don't think it will be very successful.
No, I mean the interest in Nigeria has already died down, even amongst Christians who are like, "Save the Christians in Nigeria," again because like they don't even know where Nigeria is, and they're also not white. But I think we're having to. It's interesting that we're having to rely on Gulf states to kind of effectuate
Mhm.
our regional influence throughout, especially the Sahel, because they do have a vast amount of like intelligence networks through there. They're the ones that can like give arms to certain groups, or at least introduce arms into certain supply chains where they know ISIS or like the Islamic State or Boko Haram will have access to it. And sometimes they're just blatantly sending out Colombian trained mercenaries, Washington trained mercenaries from Colombia's special forces, facilitated by Eric Prince from Blackwater, who's known as the mercenary captain of Dubai, and send them in to like train and support the Janjaweed militias and the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, who have now basically captured all of Darfur. So,
Mhm.
yeah, our engagement with Africa is never going to be like, it's never going to look like what it looks like in West Asia or Venezuela. But no, we have massive interest there, and of course, like
Mhm.
more assets have been allocated to AFRICOM than is generally expected, because our footprint in Africa is actually pretty small. There's not any like massive bases. We do have like
Mhm.
allies in South Africa and a couple other
They
states,
abandoned Africa.
Rwanda. What?
The US, the only way I could say is that they abandoned Africa. And I can't remember who it was, but I remember one of the states, I think congressman had actually said that they were so focused on other regions around the world, because especially in West Asia, because obviously if it's oil, etc., that they undermined the African people. They undermined the African continent as being too poor to ever threaten them in any particular way.
Well,
And actually, I think that,
we made sure
Africa,
that they were
the
poor.
yeah, exactly. They were too
Yeah.
poor because obviously they were trapped in these debt traps, which actually, I mean, most of the African debt, around, I think over 90%, is actually to, private Western creditors. And that was a way of securing, well, they can't do anything. They're too poor. They're too busy trying to find clean water. There's nothing that they can do. And
Or they're
so
too
now,
busy killing
however,
each other.
but China came in, and this is the
Yeah.
thing. China came in and provided a lot of this basic infrastructure. They've been able to appeal to to a lot of African leaders, because they actually, at the very least, even if not ideally, providing the kind of material, the material that they need to be able to economically grow and break away, I guess, from just becoming purely resource commodity based or agricultural based economies. And that is the key to developing and therefore breaking that sort of disequilibrium, like I spoke about in yesterday's episode, of that allows for exploitation to take place. So China has, the United States abandoned Africa, thinking that that was not a matter of urgency. But again, this is how China functions differently. They're very quiet. You don't really see much, but behind their scenes, they're doing a lot. And they have been working inside Africa now for over a decade, 15 years at the very least. And they have established very deep connected ties, and invested billions inside that infrastructure. And there's nothing that the US can do at this point that's going to jeopardize it. And that's why they're relying, because you mentioned before about they're relying on comprador states, such as Saudi Arabia, or rather the UAE, who are acting at this point as sub-imperialist states,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
serving the US.
No, I mean, especially I think, wait, was it last year we were kind of talking about how it looked like Saudi Arabia, because they had like restarted formal relations with Iran. I think MBS visited Tehran and stuff. I was like, they're like, oh, they're kind of playing both sides of the fence. Flash forward a year
Yeah.
later, it does not look at all like
Mhm.
that they're playing both sides of the fence. The U.S. did a lot to kind of tempt them away from the whole BRICS bloc. Part of that was like promising massive AI investment, and to turn like what was like Riyadh or Abu Dhabi, I forget which city it was, into like the new Silicon Valley promising massive investments, but also opening U.S. up to massive investments. And like, what's been crazy watching this is the rehabilitation of Mohammed bin Salman. You know,
Oh yeah.
the crown prince. You know, he's gone from like global pariah to global patron, at least from the American perspective. It's one of the most extraordinary political feats of our time, because like he went through a whole Jelani process into Abu al-Shara, you know, because he just this week triumphantly returns to Washington after like nearly a decade of banishment. Why was he banished? Because Saudi Arabia murdered the Dawn founder Jamal Khashoggi in 2018,
Mm-hmm.
and like after that, business investments in Saudi Arabia dried up. You know, he had broken the kind of like neoliberal decorum of, you know, how business is done. They couldn't be associated with someone who assassinates journalists. You know, corporate executive pulled out of Riyadh investment conferences, but now he is back, baby. He is expected to dole out like $600 billion in promised investments to like U.S. companies as part of the exchange of not being a pariah anymore, and obtaining, this is absolutely insane, a long desired security guarantee from the United States. I haven't had time to go through what the security guarantee looks like, but I've been like looking at Twitter with some like professionals. It's like a joint defense thing. Like U.S. troops would be obliged to defend Riyadh.
This is going to be very interesting going forward with regards to what's going to be happening with Iran, because let's not forget in April 2023, obviously the whole peace deal was signed between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and that was obviously brokered by China. And that was considered to have obviously really signaled as well China's growing power in terms of global politics. That the fact that they were able to bring Saudi Arabia closer to Iran, but also it was supposed to symbolize this shift from Saudi Arabia being this very staunch kind of U.S. ally. And then obviously now that's drastically changed in just the way that you've just described. And I think it's going to be very interesting now, because we're going to see, I made an actual video about this myself on YouTube, where I kind of got into how the current kind of the genocide that was taking place in Gaza, like the high intensity genocide, stopped because they're trying to refocus on other global wars, whether it's Ukraine, Venezuela, but I also said Iran. So they're going to start mobilizing against Iran very soon at some particular point. And it's just going to be very interesting to see now, because Iran has said in the past, if anybody tries to strike us, if the United States strikes us, we will be striking their bases wherever they may be. And it's going to that would also include now Saudi Arabia, and therefore any sort of operation might be viewed as a direct threat to Saudi Arabia. And how will the United States and Saudi Arabia kind of work towards and work around that with regards to Iran? So it's, and I actually wanted to say, like, I've some time ago now, but I haven't actually mentioned this point. I also found the deal between like Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, although the defense pact, although that has been for years in the making, prior obviously to 2025, that also might be proven to be quite a complication for Iran. That during the 12-day war, Pakistan had pledged to back Iran. But now, if it's obviously got really a defense pact with Saudi Arabia, that means that, to what extent will this jeopardize its relationship with Iran if an all-scale war breaks out? It seems like Iran is gradually being isolated in that context. Again, that's just something that off the top of my head.
I can see.
Yeah, with regards to,
I don't want to get like sidetracked, but like there's a lot of different complicated reasons that Pakistan would enter into a security agreement with Saudi Arabia, not the least of which we don't want to neglect mentioning is that Pakistan, after Iran falls, like they're next on the target list, a long-standing target list, not just within neocon circles in the United States, but most specifically with the Israelis.
Oh yeah, but the thing is, if I was Pakistan for that reason, I probably would focus more on creating stronger relations, probably with China and Iran, who all have more in common than with Saudi Arabia, who's most likely going to be the source alongside Israel that encircles and targets Iran to begin with, which then will expose Pakistan.
Yeah, because of course Israel can always lean on India too, and Modi's government there too.
I think that was I think if I was Pakistan, I would not have engaged in that little maneuver, but that's happened now. But the situation, going back to the topic, obviously, of the Gulf monarchies and their involvement in the African continent, it has been basically to act as the agents of imperialism by creating these sort of organizations that either are engaging, like I said, in warfare, civil warfare. For example, let's just go now to Sudan very quickly, because obviously we've been seeing the footage that's been coming out of Sudan, the mass ethnic cleansing and genocide that's been taken. I mean, it's very that is a very that can very clearly, there are many arguments that can be made for that being a genocide, but obviously it hasn't been officially as such stated. But yes, that I would definitely argue that is a genocide that's been taking place. Obviously, we know that the RSF has been funded, sponsored, and armed by the UAE, which is a US ally. And we've seen that the West in this particular instance has done very little, if anything, to actually sort of bring attention to what's going on in Sudan. And it's been very muted, the responses from the political establishment overall within the West. And why? Well, because the situation in Sudan actually does several things. First of all, like we said in yesterday's episode, it actually helps sustain this divide and rule inside of Sudan. Because prior to the outbreak in 2023, which was obviously when the civil war, if you want to call it a civil war, I call it like an imperialist war within Sudan. But prior to the civil war in Sudan, there was this understanding that there was going to be a new established civil government that was going to take place, where basically the RSF would basically pave way to the power, sort of kind of step away and allow a government to take place. Now, a Sudan that's now going to be a functioning country and a functioning state, in that particular instance, does several things. It's open, and it would be open to working perhaps with countries like China, and maybe entering into all these sort of international trade agreements and alliances that will threaten the United States, bearing in mind that Sudan is strategically located where? By the Red Sea. And at the same time, Russia also had an agreement with Sudan to establish a military base itself by the Red Sea as well, which is something that the United States does not want. It wants to, as I said before, have maritime superiority, especially in areas like the Panama Canal. So is the Red Sea. These are strategic areas for international trade, but also for military operations. They've already lost control over Yemen, and they do not want to have Russia placed inside Sudan, or having Sudan as a state functioning perhaps, or entering into economic trade ties and relations with China. And then the other aspect that I would say is what this genocidal war is actually doing on the global market, particularly in the gold industry, more so than even the rare earth. Because although there's a lot of rare earth potential inside of Sudan, it hasn't really been tapped. But the gold has been, which again is very important, like I said, for the tech industry overall. We know that the RSF is essentially funding itself from basically mining illegally the gold reserves inside Sudan and selling them off like through indirect routes into the UAE, who then makes massive profits off of it, refines it, and sells it into the global market, which then allows all these. Yeah,
it's so Israeli, because Israel is one of their biggest exporters diamonds, and they have zero diamond mines. Just like the UAE is like the biggest exporter of gold, but has zero gold mines.
I mean, stealing gold from Yemen as well. Saudi
Yeah.
Arabia and the UAE, that was part of their operations inside of Yemen as well. That was the entire purpose behind that. But
Yeah.
you know what I wanted to say with that, something that people don't always realize, is that what this does in terms of the global supply chain, which does benefit obviously the West, and particularly again going back to these tech companies and investment companies and et cetera, and this whole financial speculative bubble that is the American financial economy, is that when you have these illegal extractions of rare earth minerals or gold in Sudan, in Congo, in Nigeria, in Venezuela, and they're happening in so many different places. It's basically like blood resources. It means that legitimate companies, legitimate sort of extracting companies and mining corporations are under downward pressure, because they cannot compete with this essentially very cheap resources that are flooding the market from all these conflict conflict or imperialist conflict zones. And so it means that prices are kept at a particularly low, which allows, again, a lot of these corporations, whether it's like I said, in the tech industry or the fire sector overall, to make exorbitant profits by keeping the supply chain at a far cheaper level. So you see, you have to see how these things operate and why, for example, the Western states and the United States in particular is so muted in terms of how they're approaching what is happening in Sudan. Because yes, it's an ally, but also it's an ally that's doing something, engaging in imperialist activity that serves the capitalist machine.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just kind of sorry. I'm trying to find a specialized disclosure report. I should have prepped this before from like Boeing or something to talk about those supply chains. But yes, you know, a lot of different groups and militias and gangs will engage in artisanal mining. You know, that's intent violent, zero working conditions. A lot of them use enslaved children as labor. And oh, I think I found it. And then all these countries know about it, or all these companies know about it, but just as kind of like an artifact, I'm kind of looking for SEC filing details right now, but
I
yeah.
like
So
the extent to how we're winging this now.
I'm sorry.
I love how we're winging this. Let's go. I was
Alright.
looking also for an article earlier.
Yeah. Okay. So
There we
basically,
go.
when it talks about supply chains, like everybody knows where these rare earth minerals are coming from, and if they're coming from a conflict zone, or a 3TG country, tin, tantalum, and to something, tungsten, like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and other countries in Central Africa, you got to file with the SEC, Specialized Disclosure Report, Conflict Minerals Disclosure.
Disclosure.
And there really is no disclosure. It's basically basically an overview of where they spend their money or products based on commercial airplanes, defense, space and security, and global services. They say 3TG in our products. Our products are highly complex, containing thousands of parts from thousands of direct and indirect suppliers throughout the world. Typically, multiple tiers exist between the tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold 3TG mines in our direct suppliers. Therefore, there's too many degrees of separation. We don't know what the hell's going on. Therefore, we rely on our direct suppliers to work with their suppliers in order to provide us with the accurate information about the origin of 3TG and the materials, components, parts, and subassemblies, collectively components we purchase. Since 2013, we have required our new supplier contracts and renewals of our previous contracts with the 3TG information necessary to conduct our due diligence. So basically, if you keep reading through these specialized disclosure reports, they basically say things like the supply chains are too complex. We have a conflict-free policy and its due diligence process, and we put in formal requests for supply chains for our 3TG products, including the names and locations of smelters and refiners. There is no oversight for any of this. We've talked about this before.
No.
All you do is file one of those with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and you are literally good to go. It's insane. So why do people think that U.S. corporations aren't through multiple degrees of separation dealing with these militias, with these gangs, with these, you know, revolutionary fronts, which are basically just like sponsored by like Rwandan governments or whatever, to extract this through artisanal mining and slave labor? We know it.
This is unfortunately, like this is also part of the issues with the international legal structure and how that operates as well. And, the whole issue of piercing the corporate veil through all these kind of, subsidiaries and indirect routes that usually a lot of these companies and corporations use in order to be able to engage in this sort of behavior, including other forms of illegalities, money laundering, etc. It's all sort of the same thing. They use all these other different avenues, which are technically legitimate, in order to avoid any degree of responsibility. And if you look at the document itself, there's so many instances where it says OECD guidelines, and this is part of the international human rights kind of joke, I call it. So much of it is just essentially guidelines, and then to a certain degree, there's something called CSR. I don't want to get into it too much, but it's basically corporate social responsibility, which is what that document is. And what corporate social responsibility is sort of the ability, it sort of places upon corporations the responsibility to self-regulate so that they don't engage in practices that are considered illegal or harmful. But I mean, these are the same corporations that are obviously got something to gain out of it, and they're the ones that are directly involved through the multi-stakeholders of the international legal system in the formation of these regulations, because it's no longer just state bound. So the CSR, which is basically what is this kind of document there, just kind of absolves them of all responsibility and says, oh yeah, we've self-regulated, and they apply their own standards to things, therefore they cannot be held legally accountable in any way. That's the little lawyer in me. I had to say that, but I mean,
but also,
it's just how it works.
Also, there's no, like, even if they're not held to these standards and they're found out, there's no coercive enforcement mechanism.
No, there's no enforcement mechanism.
The most you'll get hit with is a negligible SEC fine that doesn't even come close to outweighing your profits through these like completely sketchy supply chains.
Yeah, because I mean,
there's no reason to not, from the capitalist perspective, there's literally no reason to not conduct business this way.
Yeah, there's no international enforcement mechanism for things that are related to human rights violations of this magnitude. The only thing international law protects is capital and profit. So like you said, at the most, maybe pay out something that's like, like a negligent fee or something like that. But there's no enforcement mechanisms for anything outside of that, which is why I've always been very highly critical of the entire existence of human rights law. I mean, it's a great sort of outline framework and like a base to kind of misguide people into believing that there is laws in place to protect them, but the reality is that they are not actually practical. They don't do anything other than to subjugate the masses into believing in a system is there to protect them when it actually isn't. And this is one classic example, as was the case obviously in Gaza. So we're seeing
So like, yeah, exactly. Like the UN Security Council exists to legitimize what is a gross moral violation. What this Gaza peace plan, and we can talk about it now. I mean, the Security Council shut down every ceasefire resolution, every peace plan. It was the U.S. doing it. But now, all of a sudden, it goes through. A motion that a lot of these countries should have a problem with. Russia abstained, China abstained, but it went through, and it's the quote-unquote peace plan. So many other journalists have talked about like the problems with the 20-point plan. It's super vague, and people are like, that's why it worked. No, it's super vague, so you don't have to enforce it. And also, Israel's never once held to a ceasefire, and certainly has now. But the peace plan is basically to enshrine in the international institution framework, the framework of an international institution like the UN, enshrine perpetual occupation and displacement. And also to give a test run for a little colony in Gaza that will be expanded out to Gaza Lago as a whole. And this international security force is basically Israel and the United States don't want this to be their problem. I've talked about this so many times when we do military analysis episodes. The U.S. never really goes to war just by itself. This Venezuela thing is kind of crazy because usually what we do is coalition build. The Iraq War Coalition, the ISF, the International Security Force in Afghanistan. We're resurrecting ISF. ISF was in Iraq. ISF was in Afghanistan. ISF was in Somalia in the 90s. It's how we build legitimacy and also gives us a degree of separation to maintain an element of soft power. Because we're like, no, look, Britain's here. So is Mongolia. Oh, there's Czech soldiers. And so we're kind of hands off because it's how we manufacture like consent and legitimacy. One of our other named operations against the Houthis is called Operation Prosperity Guardian. and it has multiple countries involved in it. It has the British Navy. It's got, the Greeks in there too. And actually, like, in some ways, this Venezuelan operation is kind of co-signed by other countries as well, because the Brits moved a carrier strike group into the Mediterranean to replace ours so we could send it to the Caribbean. But anyways, that's kind of getting a little bit off topic. But yes, global institutional consent is what they're going for with this Gaza deal.
Yeah. So the way I described it is like it's a continuation of what we've been seeing now for the better part of the last 7-8 months. That's what I would say.
Absolutely,
I mean,
yeah.
there were reports coming out from Axios dating back from I think it was April and April, May, where there was apparently leaked documents that were discussing, and this was actually goes even back to the Biden administration. And I want to be very clear about that. This wasn't just a Trump administration sort of policy, but this was what was being discussed even during the Biden administration. And it's always important to remember, even with Venezuela, even with what's going on in Sudan, this is a continuation of American policy, and we should not fall prey as well to these bipartisan sort of, political narratives that are just being thrown around, because it is a continuation of policy.
And I just one more thing to remind people of to demonstrate your point. The strike packages and the rehearsals for the strike packages on Iranian nuclear facilities were greenlit and conducted under Biden.
Exactly. This is Trump continuing what Biden had, what was working on, was continuing Trump's work before that and Obama's work before that. It's the same sort of underlying theme. So these discussions were being had for a very long time, and the idea was always, and we saw a lot of these leaked reports that were discussing having an Iraq-style sort of governance, a U.S. joint Arab coalition and forces inside the Gaza Strip in order for the purpose of essentially creating a military to, I guess, suppress and infiltrate the Palestinian resistance, to disarm the Palestinian resistance and to essentially break this. And this was being discussed from the Biden administration, like I said, and we saw the same reports coming out now. And this began to materialize, especially in obviously in the United Nations General Assembly resolution that was passed in September. That was the Saudi-French General Assembly, the French proposal. Because in that General Assembly resolution, what had been essentially passed in the United Nations was the establishment of an international force inside of Gaza to control the Gaza Strip, to disarm Hamas. It condemned Hamas's 7th of October attacks, and essentially the criminalization. And we said this before, I think right before you were taken in by the Israelis, kidnapped rather by the Israelis. We said that they had essentially criminalized the Palestinian resistance, which was the first time up until this point that had actually happened. And that, again, was led by Saudi Arabia. And what we had also discussed is that this is also part and parcel of all these Gaza Riviera and Gaza 2035 plans that were also published from a year ago now, back in 2024, the summertime. They were speaking about the same sort of forces.
But it wasn't like, I just want to, I don't want to interrupt you on your flow, but it's not just the Gaza Riviera, Gaza 2035 plan. Like, there were think tanks like the Rand Corporation petitioning the White House for their own vision of what it would look like. It was kind of like a contract bidding for like what kind of think tank would produce the best plan for the interests of suppressing resistance and expanding capital.
Yeah, and then it goes back as well to the Wall Street. I think it was Washington Post, not Wall Street Journal. The Washington Post even published the leaked documents that were verified by the international administration of international free. I can't remember the organization for international journalists had basically had access to these documents that said what this entire period throughout the 2-year genocide against the Palestinian people, the Arab states had developed the closest military and intelligence ties with Israel and the United States behind the scenes, meeting regularly and discussing how exactly these operations would take place. And in fact, even in January of this year, they were also participating in training programs, military training programs that were also tailored towards the destruction of subterranean tunnels, aka the same ones that Hezbollah uses in Lebanon, and obviously the ones that the Palestinians use inside of Gaza in order to defend themselves against the colonial occupier. So these Arab states were basically participating in these drills and training and intelligence sort of gathering in order specifically to prepare them for this. And now we're seeing the ISF being established, this multinational stabilizing force, which is not a peacekeeping force, similar to what we saw, similar to what we have here in Cyprus or what we have, for example, in Lebanon. This is a force directly trained that's going to be an accumulation of, I don't know, military from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt, the United States, and these are going to be forces
throw in
that
some freaking Colombian mercenaries in there too while we're
some
at it?
Colombian mercenaries. They're just going to be forces from all these different parts, so many different countries or mercenaries essentially that are going to be placed inside of Gaza to go into direct warfare with the Palestinian resistance, because that is essentially what's going to happen. They're not going to disarm. This is a new stage of the war inside of Gaza.
Okay, well, so first of all, I just want to say how absurd it is. Demilitarization of an armed force is a combat operation, even if you don't shoot at anybody. Like it's considered a combat operation. So this peacekeeping force is actively going to be conducting combat operations in Gaza. Of course, it's going to come into conflict with Hamas, who really has made overtures to surrender like heavy weapons, like rockets that could hit like nearby settlements or something, but not their small arms. Because like once they go, once they actually disarm, it's done. Resistance is done. So that's not really feasible. And one of the reasons Israel wants this to happen is because they couldn't disarm them themselves. It was too thorny. It wasn't working. They were becoming exponentially more pariahs the more they can. They don't have the capacity to do that. And also they're unwilling to go into the tunnels and actually do that as well. Likewise, these authoritarian monarchic regimes like Saudi Arabia doesn't want Hamas to be successful or to work. There's nothing they fear more than an Arab Spring 2.0. This is one of the reasons, alongside, real estate opportunity investment. Jared Kushner is heavily plugged in to Riyadh, and they don't want this to be an inspiration to other Arabs or other Arab populations throughout the MENA countries. Not at all. And they just have a massive security investment as well with the Israeli defense state. It's what they use the same technology to monitor their own people, to look for, political dissent. And they have their own secret police that comes and wraps people up and they disappear in jail forever. So like, these aren't good governments. These aren't benevolent governments. They're there for their own interests, which is money, investments, establishing better security internally, and to dissuade anybody in their own populations from rising up against them.
That's the irony. So I agree with everything you said. I would also add access to Eastern Mediterranean ports, pipelines, trade routes that they want to establish. And also, the AI game. The AI game is also very important there, because Saudi Arabia and the Qatar, the Gulf monarchies, as we've said multiple times on this show, they want to be the new center for, high tech. They want to have e-cities. They want to be the center stage alongside, obviously, all these American the Magnificent Seven tech companies who have engaged in all these sort of memorandums of understandings and deals with the Gulf monarchies in order to basically establish them as the alternative to China and the centerpiece for AI high-tech global domination.
It's not going to work in America. It's not going to work there. Actually, one of my buddies, he's Iraqi. He lives in Austin now, and he's like a big data engineer for General Motors. And he was just at one of these AI conferences in Riyadh. And he was like, dude, it's just one scam after another, a bunch of snake oil merchants. Like, this AI thing is not going to happen.
I know, but that's where the money is. Like I said, this is what happens when the entire economy is based on the speculation. Speculation, and at the end of the day, and I always try to remind people of this. The Gulf states together collectively are some of the largest, if not the largest, investors in U.S. capital assets after after Europe. I mean, it's rather significant, and this is something that people never really discuss. Everybody's so hyper focused on APAC, which in the general scheme of things is rather small by comparison to the economic influence and interlocking that the Arab Gulf states have with the U.S. financial system. Nobody ever discusses that, and so their wealth, their ability to sustain wealth, and it's now directly linked to this American capital, which is itself linked to this speculation of the AI, essentially this AI bubble that's being established. But also, Saudi Arabia wanting to become this new hub, not just Saudi Arabia, but the entirety of the Gulf states, which are trying to do so. And Gaza represents an avenue for them to do that. It will connect. It's the establishment of the so-called digital Silk Road for them, where they're going to connect through into the Eastern Mediterranean, and all these deals that are now also happening between Israel, Cyprus, and Greece, and how that's going to connect to Gaza. And so they have their own agenda for the people of Palestine. That's one of and in doing so, by the way, it's actually countering China, Russia, and Iran's interest in trying to economically isolate them. Going back again to the conversation we had yesterday, when you have control over these resources and trade routes and key trade routes, you are able to control the global economy and inflict economic pain on your adversaries through manipulating the global market and prices of these particular resources, and etc. So that's one of the aspects, in addition to all the other things that you mentioned. But you know what I would say? The irony is, with regards to wanting to suppress the Palestinian people in order to prevent another Arab Spring from happening, is that I believe, if anything, this endeavor is probably going to provoke retaliation against the Gulf monarchies by not even Gulf monarchies, from within the Arab states themselves. Because what this effectively means is that people are going to start recognizing that they're going to be seeing their governments directly funding or placing military, even personnel or mercenaries, inside of Gaza to fight the Palestinian people, basically mimicking Israel. And it comes to a certain point that no matter how apathetic people can be, I mean, there are some within the Arab world, there are people that obviously do support the Palestinian cause, and there are others, we have to be honest, that don't necessarily care a great deal very much as well. There are others which can be a bit more self-serving depending on the country that you're in. However, I think this image of seeing countries within this ISF alliance between the Arab states, Turkey as well. Turkey, that's going to be an interesting one, because as well, Turkey has said, Erdogan has said he wants because the Turkish population is very, very pro-Palestinian. And absolutely. So Erdogan has made a big point of saying, I support Hamas. And now he wants to have a direct sort of a position inside the ISF and inside the new governance of Gaza, who is going to be in direct combat with the people of with the Palestinian resistance. Because it's not just Hamas. They want to disarm the entirety of the Palestinian resistance. And this is going to be met with huge retaliation at home. And I think we can appreciate, I think the similar things will probably, I think to a certain degree in Egypt, it will also turn into a bit of a problem. Maybe, perhaps, I'm not quite sure about it. But definitely, for example, in a country like Turkey, which is a key U.S. ally, as well in the region. So I think that, if anything, it probably might make things worse for a lot of these Arab leaders, as opposed to in terms of subjugating their own populations. But unfortunately for the Palestinians,
unfortunately for the Palestinians, but no one, looking at this security arrangement, no one's going to come out on top. This is not Israel in a lot of ways is done. They're kind of past the point of no return, past the event horizon. They've lost the American right, and that was their main source of support. And of course, there'll always be the Democratic establishment that does as well, but they're really not in a position to recover militarily at all ever again. This will dominate. This 2-year war of attrition has set them back militarily by over a decade. Some experts think. And now they're gearing up for another extended military operation against Hezbollah.
And then at some point Iran as well.
They're gearing up for another distance conflict against Iran. It's going to be wild. Watching a military operation in the south of Lebanon while this international security force has control of Gaza. And Israel's still expanding into Syria, into southern Lebanon, and then moving on towards looking towards sustained combat operations against the Iranian military. It's just not. It's the worst political stunt I've seen in a minute.
Do you know what it is? It's just because what I always want to remind people is it's not just going to be Israel, though. That's the thing. It's what we're seeing now is a division of labor. So Israel cannot basically I mean, it's been incredibly unsuccessful inside of Gaza. We even saw those reports by Plus 927 News that essentially they only managed to, and that's not even sure, 8,000 resistance fighters out of how many tens of thousands, and that number's actually even gone up. And again, it's a very hostile terrain. A lot of their tunnels are still intact. A lot of the fighters are still alive, and it's not going to.
Yeah,
it's not something that's going to be possible.
And with the exception of like the pager operation, that was like the only successful like military action that they really had in Lebanon. That and dropping 30 bombs to kill Nasrallah and a whole bunch of civilians. Like aside from that, those were the only military victories they had, and it was completely unsustainable for them. And that's when Hezbollah had lost its entire command hierarchy. So this is why, and again, I think it's a great point that you made, a division of labor. Because now the U.S. is increasing its military engagement with the Lebanese armed forces. That includes sending training advisors. That includes more material support and training doctrine.
They're going to do what they're doing in Venezuela. So what we're going to look is like try to provoke a civil war inside of Venezuela in the same way that they're trying. Inside of Lebanon, much like they are in Venezuela. This is how they're going to try to operate. And I will also just say this as well with regards to this. So we've got this joint ISF operation inside of Gaza will be a joint Arab Muslim-led supposedly operation with Turkey, etc., Saudi Arabia, Qatar. They're going to be dealing with that. The United States, alongside Israel, are basically fueling civil war inside of Lebanon, whilst they will also play their role in targeting strategic assets inside of Lebanon, so that as to weaken the Lebanese economy even more, and then use economic coercion through the IMF and World Bank in order to further coerce the country into capitulation or to turn people against, obviously, Hezbollah. This is also part and parcel of how Saudi Arabia, we said this before, Saudi Arabia and Qatar, etc., are also trying to entice the resistance fighters. So it's basically about asphyxiating their economic conditions to such a degree that people will basically give up. That's kind of what they're trying to do. They're like, okay, we concede, we surrender rather, and Lebanon will fall into line with Syria and everybody else. And whilst all this is happening, they're trying to obviously limit the impact on Israel, and then altogether, and this is my personal opinion, the war against Iran isn't just going to be on behalf of Israel. It will be in conjunction with, I believe, Saudi Arabia, whether directly or indirectly, Qatar, directly or indirectly, United States, and Israel. And they're all going to basically try to surround Iran, and possibly even now with Syria. And it's like how they're going to use Syria in that greater scheme of things. So this is what I mean by the division of labor. They know Israel is not going to do this by itself. It's all of them coming together. And this is what this security pact that they established, the regional security pact that they established over the last 2-3 years, this is what I think they were organizing and orchestrating. It's very clear that was the plan. And that's why now they're involving themselves in Gaza to try and deal with that. But that can't be dealt with. Even the ISF, Gaza it's too much of a hostile. It's not going to happen. They're not going to demilitarize. They're not going to subjugate the Palestinian people. That's not going to succeed. The Lebanon project isn't going to succeed.
Yeah. I would just like to say, too, one thing that I don't think any commentator has mentioned yet when it comes to this ISF. Like, they will be doing combat operations, as I said. These are not.
That's what I said. They could be at battle with the Palestinians. This is not just a peacekeeping force.
Even when it comes to his military as crappy as the IDF, these guys are worse. Like, these are not trained professional soldiers at all. I've worked with some of those people. I went through freaking Ranger school with 2 Jordanian officers, like high-level officers who were like the most incompetent people I've met in my life. The only reason that they passed was because the instructors were told to pass them because they're like Jordanian royalty. So this is who's going to be in charge of the International Security Force. And it's not going to be even as it's going to be even less cohesive than the Israeli military, because it's a bunch of different militaries all working together in a joint operations center, having conflicts, not getting along, having like ego play into it. It's going this entire operation. If you've ever done joint operations with foreign militaries, this is going to be an absolute clusterfuck, as we say in the armed services.
And it's going to be a lot of political backlash as well, internationally,
Absolutely.
within the respective states. And again, like you said as well, the Palestinians at this point, they're battle tested. Sounds terrible to say, but they have ample experience. They will not be intimidated by these, I guess, mercenaries who really, like you said, they're even more probably inept than even the Israeli occupation forces themselves. So,
well, because like
this is one, yeah.
I don't want to go down like a nerd military analysis rabbit hole. Like, at least the
Let's go.
IDF has like non-commissioned officers, like sergeants who deal with the men. Like, a lot of these armies that they're going to be sending in there has privates and officers. It's going to be insane. They like all Saudi does and all the UAE does is drop US bombs. And they don't even use their own soldiers for their operations because they don't soldier, man. This is why they have to have Eric Prince come in and get them mercenaries from Colombia, Washington trained mercenaries from Colombia, because there's not really a military pension program for people retiring from the Colombian armed forces. So they need money and they just go. They don't even use their own soldiers for anything. So this should be interesting.
That's why I said it's going to be a failing operation. I genuinely do. And I think, a lot of people were asking, why didn't Russia and China, object? Why didn't they use their veto power? And, the main reason they didn't object and they decided to abstain is because they don't agree with the ISF. However, because all the Arab and Muslim states, including Turkey, backed it, and vehemently so, they had to, like, okay, fine, we don't support it, but they didn't want to be seen as the obstacle to establishing peace and going against these Gulf states, and Turkey included. So they abstained. But I think deep down I think based on their own analytics of the situation, they understand it's going to be another failing project, and I think they're just watching that unravel itself. And even though, it is a risk in a way, because you never know, but yeah, it is. I genuinely see that to be a failing project, including their operations and what they're planning to do in Lebanon as well.
It's kind of,
and
I guess, like, kind of rounding it out. It kind of seems like a microcosm of the entire, like, Twilight of American imperium, because we're trying to do stuff that we've tried to do so many times, but in a smaller scale, and it's just not working. ISF in Iraq, ISF in Afghanistan, now ISF now. And we've kind of, like, after this collapses, literally, what's next?
Do you remember an article that we read as well? It's going to connect to what you've just said. It was published last year, and I think it was, again, I think it must have been the Wall Street Journal. I'm not quite sure. And basically, they were arguing about how America's military high-tech sort of weapons, etc., which was, they had the military doctrine of precision over mass, was pretty much the military doctrine in the United States, whereby if they invested enough in these high-tech GPS-guided missiles, etc., and systems, they wouldn't need to mass produce, like, more, I guess, traditional weaponry, tanks, etc., as they, once would have, because the precision and efficiency of these military equipment would be enough to be able to kind of defeat a numerous enemy. This is kind of what these experts were saying. But what I guess we saw now is what they were admitting to.
No one I ever met in the military actually agreed with that doctrine. It was always seen as a freaking R&D cash grab attempt.
Anybody with common sense would disagree, but that was debate. But from a common sense perspective, of course, it was ridiculous. But they needed to sell a narrative to justify the deindustrialization that was taking place, and the fact that they were prioritizing profits, and therefore the profits were to create profits. It was more so to invest in these high-tech, expensive gadgets, supposedly, because that's where the money was. That's where the money was at. That's the way that they were able to, find those new avenues of investment. So they needed to sell this, like I said, this mendacious diagesis that this is fundamentally in part to, to advance our military capacity, when they knew that in fact that wasn't the case. And now we saw, starting from Russia, Ukraine, how quickly Russia basically depletes and kind of outsmarts and destructs these so-called intelligence high-tech weapons from the United States. We saw the impact. Even the Houthis were able to successfully intercept and also outmaneuver these same weapons, these same missiles from the United States, as did Iran. That's why they're also worried, going back to yesterday's episode with regards to Venezuela establishing these relations with China and Russia and its military sort of strategic location within, so close to the United States, and seeing how their military infrastructure is failing. Not only does it now lack industrial capacity, but the whole argument of precision over mass has failed. And now they're planning to what? They don't have enough. They just do not have the resources to what they're gonna continue these operations inside of Gaza and then inside of Lebanon and Iraq. It's just none of this is feasible. They don't. Not only do they not have the industrial base, not only do they not have their stockpiles running out, but what they do have been proven to be rather unsuccessful. So yet even though they have this information, this is what I wanted to get to. They're still, kind of going full force with all these overseas wars and ambitions, whether it's in Venezuela, whether it's, Ukraine, Iran, I don't know, Gaza, you name it. And all of it is just, it's bound to fail because the very rules of capitalism that the US economy is based on, it's collapsing upon itself. And this is why when I say this to people, I'm not being positive or unrealistically positive. I'm actually being pragmatic from an economic standpoint. It's just, and I'll just finish off with this. There was a CSIS report in 2023 before October 7th that had concluded that the next major wars that will take place will be won not through military means, but through the country's industrial capacity. And already, the United States has lost that.
Yeah, and I think to tie everything off about what you just said, about precision over volume to basically just sell a bunch of, Sorry, guys, I'm exhausted today, but I'll just end with this, okay? The U.S. military is replacing the M4 carbine, which is an assault rifle. It's a great assault rifle. It carries 30 rounds in its magazine with the next generation squad weapon, which carries 20 rounds and is objectively worse. But Sig Sauer won the contract to replace all the rifles in the U.S. military for $5 billion because apparently it extends like the range by like 100 meters or something. Bro, show me most people in the military can't even hit a target at like 100 meters. What are you talking about? This is just replacing for replacing's sake. 10-year contract, an additional $2.7 billion for Vortex smart optics, which don't even work under night vision. So cool. Yeah. You've just basically off your combat load, you've just downloaded like 120 rounds that you can no longer carry because of this stupid friggin' thing. But hey, at least someone's getting paid. Hell yeah.
Exactly. Short-term gains. That's how it was. Because you see, when we speak about the counter tendencies of capitalism, this is what we're talking about. Yeah. It's always a quick fix to postpone the inevitable, but then eventually it just reaches this critical mass where it will implode because it's just simply not sustainable. This is exactly what we're seeing. This is exactly what you've just described.
We don't need a new assault rifle. We certainly don't need a worse one with freaking microchips in it.
Oh, I love how you came in with that. I like how you're very passionate. You're just clearly thinking about it intensely.
It's literally
Lena, that sounds great, but we don't need a new assault rifle.
This is the dumbest thing I've seen since the F-35 project. And it's only stupid if you don't understand the mandates of profit maximization every quarter or everybody dies and you will not have fulfilled your fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders to boil the seas. But I mean, I think they're absolutely constricted by the mandates of our economic system. And this is the best that they can do. And they have no other choice but to do it. And I guess we're all going downhill in a handcart. And hopefully, when everything emerges from the ashes, we'll have a better world. But it definitely seems like it's just more of the same old shit that didn't work over the past, 40 years. We're trying it again here with this International Security Force project. And no matter what our engagement
in worse conditions for the U.S. than it was even 20 years ago.
Yeah. And for no matter what our Gulf proxies or sub-imperial states do in Africa, it's not going to be able to unseat China's embedding in the continent. So I don't know, man. I think we've already discussed Venezuela, the AI bubble, the degradation of the petrodollar, the rise of the multipolar world order, which at this point, based off our conduct over the past 10 years, like who doesn't want a multipolar world order? Who still wants to be able to like live under US sanctions? Ooh, sign me up. Like it's inevitable, but like I am concerned about the immense extinction bursts of violence that can happen during this phase.
Well, that's why, yeah, it is important. That's why it's very important now. Part of what we try to do as well is to try to educate people as to what exactly is going on, so that when this does happen, because these crises, these aren't just this. It's a form. This violence is an expression of capitalism and how it operates. Like it's part of its entire structure. And so what we need to do is to find a way to educate people as much as possible. People need to learn to mobilize and organize, because when that does happen, the only way to counter it is through organized, I guess organized revolution, really, at the end of the day. Now, to what extent are we ready for that? I mean, that's a whole other conversation.
The Americans?
That's what we can strive.
Yeah. Maybe in Europe, not over here.
No. I absolutely not in Europe. I would disagree with that immensely.
Okay, well, hey, the Italian dock workers did some cool stuff. All right.
They did. Recently. They did. Actually, Italy was quite impressive. Yeah, I have to admit, I was quite impressed with Italy's movement, especially with the whole flotilla. Yeah.
All I'm saying is that would never happen in the United States as things stand right now.
I don't know. People quite, I mean, the whole Mamdani thing in New York City has excited a lot of people. I wrote an entire piece on this on my Substack Patreon, but I mean, but at the very least, if there's some takeaway from that, is that there is at the very least some, I guess you could say some class conscious awareness is developing within American society. Would you argue that, at least within New York City?
No, everybody in the United States watched that go down.
No, but I mean, do you not think that the fact that people voted for Mamdani, doesn't that signal some sort of class conscious development? Would you say?
Absolutely, and then people becoming more and more alienated from the Democratic Party, because most people voted for Mamdani, but like our establishment Dems wouldn't endorse him. So that means they're not endorsing you, and they're not endorsing your vote. And now everyone's kind of like, what the fuck? So, I mean, I think you and I have discussed Democratic. I mean, you and I are both further left than DSA.
Democratic Socialists, yeah.
way
definitely.
further left. They'd call us radicals, but they call us the far left. I was like, bro.
Yeah, we're the crazy radical left.
Yeah, well, you guys are centrists, and when the grip comes, centrists always go right. So
no, it's true. They end up compromising. Yeah. Oh yeah, trust me. I wrote a whole thing about this. It's all, especially when you're dealing with a financial hub of this pretty much attached to the entire global treasury market and the global dollar reserve currency system in the New York City. They're not about to just let you apply socialist policies, and the entire structure there doesn't allow for that to happen. And eventually you capitulate, and yes, you go very much to the center and end up disappointing your voter base. But it's important how you handle this, I guess.
Yeah. And did anyone we're kind of like, we're gonna wrap it up here, but did anyone think that the billionaires in Tribeca were gonna leave? No, they weren't gonna fucking leave. No, they weren't gonna. So anyways, guys, we're in the Twilight mode. I don't think we're like free falling till end stage yet. Hopefully in a couple decades, but yeah, this is where we're at right now, and we're going to keep trying old things, and we're going to keep trying to manufacture culture war issues and divide you about certain things and distract you about others. And this war in Venezuela, don't worry, bro, just one more war, it's okay, and then all the terrorists are gone. It's exhausting, but this is the fruits of capitalism, really. So it destroys itself, because turns out, if you take it into like the medical field, exponential continued growth inside a finite system is generally called cancer. And so we're in the malignant cancer phase right now. And it's just spreading out towards the whole world. So, but better times are ahead, we think. And I got to wrap it up here because I'm like exhausted and rambling. But we are super glad you listened. Thanks so much for stopping by. We are back and we're going to be doing some new stuff with the show for a less nerdy, again, like autistic conversation. And you still like want to do geopolitics and stuff. Dungeons and Democracies is having a test episode on Patreon. It's going to be way more chill and way, I wouldn't say superficial because it's meant to bring people in. Because again, a big barrier to entry. So I'm going to shut up. Thanks, Alina, so much for coming on, and we will see you next time.
It was great.
Cheers, y'all. Bye.